The community center smelled like dust and old paint, and the ceiling fans were doing nothing but pushing hot air from one side of the room to the other. It was 104 degrees outside. 16th day in a row. Every folding chair in that room was taken. 43 people. Nobody spoke. Corinne Vasska walked in, through the side door, and set her father's briefcase on the folding table at the front. Leather. Cracked at the corners. She'd found it in a storage unit 19 months ago, and had used it every day since. She was 32 years old. She had arrived in this town with 2 boxes and a key her father had left her. She had not been alone here since. She just hadn't known it yet. In the front row sat a man named Roland Keech. Pressed shirt. Polished shoes. The kind of smile a man wears when he thinks he's already won. He didn't know yet what was about to happen to him. Nobody in that room did. Because the real decision hadn't been made in any office, or any meeting, or any of the phone calls Roland Keech had been making for the last 2 weeks. It had been made a long time before. In the dark. On a concrete floor. Beside a humming dehumidifier. In a 10 by 20 storage unit on Old Briar Road. Cut to black. 19 months earlier. The rental van was too big for her. That was Corinne's first thought when she picked it up in Topeka. The second thought was that she should have practiced driving something this size before she signed the papers. And the third thought was that there was no one left to ask for help. So she gripped the wheel with both hands. And she pulled out onto the highway. And she drove west. She was 32 years old. Her divorce from Trenton Holbrook had been final for 11 days. She had 2 cardboard boxes in the back of the van. 1 suitcase. A coffee maker her mother had given her the year she got married. And an envelope from her father's estate lawyer that she had not opened for 6 weeks because she couldn't stand the sight of his handwriting anymore. She had opened it the night before. Inside, a small brass key. And a note. Storage Unit 14. Old Briar Self-Storage. Cedarwell, Kansas. Paid through the year. Everything inside is yours, Dad. That was it. No explanation. No context. No hint of what was in the unit, or why he had rented it, or why he was telling her about it only after he was gone. She had read the note 4 times. Then she had gone to the bathroom of her sublet and stay. Lewis and thrown up. Not from grief. From something worse. From the sudden, quiet feeling that her father, a man she had known and loved for 32 years, had been keeping a secret from her the entire time. Corinne pulled into Cedarwell just before dusk. It was a small town. Population maybe 1,100. Grain elevator on the north end. Water tower with the year 1902 painted on the side. 2 stoplights. A diner called Marge's. A hardware store with a hand-lettered sign that said Deckers the way farmhouses used to be labeled. She rolled down the window. The air smelled like wheat and cut grass and something faintly metallic from the drought that was already starting to creep in around the edges of the county. She hadn't rented an apartment. Hadn't bought groceries. Hadn't done any of the things a person is supposed to do when they move somewhere new. Because the key had felt like the only piece of direction she had. And she needed direction. So she drove straight to Old Briar Road. Old Briar Self-Storage sat at the edge of town, past the last houses, on a stretch of gravel that curved between 2 soybean fields. The sign was faded. The gate was open. The office was a small trailer, with a hand-painted line under the window that said MSADEYMI, manager. Corinne parked. Walked up the gravel path. Knocked. The door opened. Mrs. Adeyemi was maybe 77 years old. Thin. Steady. Reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked at Corinne the way a librarian looks at a book she's been waiting to reshelve for a long time. "You're Gerald's daughter." Corinne blinked. "How did you? You look like him around the eyes." Corinne swallowed. She had not expected that. "Come in," Mrs. Adeyemi said. "Sit down. I'll get the file." The trailer was cool inside. Air conditioning humming. A small ceramic bowl of hard candies on the desk. Mrs. Adeyemi moved slowly. Everything about her moved slowly. She opened a filing cabinet. Pulled out a manila folder. Set it on the desk between them. "Your father rented Unit 14 19 years ago this March," she said. "He paid every month by phone. Never once late. Never once questioned a charge." Corinne stared at the folder. 19 years. That would have made her 13. 19 years of monthly storage fees. 19 years of a secret rented room 3 states away from where her father lived. 19 years, and he had never mentioned it. Not once. Not at Thanksgiving. Not at her wedding. Not when he was sick. Not when he was dying. "Did he ever come here?" Corinne asked. Mrs. Adeyemi tilted her head. 3 times. That I know of. Once about 12 years ago, when he paid for the climate control upgrade himself, out of pocket. Once about 7 years ago, when he asked me to add a second dehumidifier. And once about 2 years ago. That was the last time. 2 years ago. 6 weeks before he died. Corinne's hands went cold. What did he do here? He walked the unit. Once around. Front to back. He stood in the doorway. He looked at the boxes. And then he closed the door. And then he came in here, and he paid the bill, through the end of the year, and he asked me to promise him something. Corinne looked up. Promise him what? Mrs. Adeyemi's eyes softened. Not sentimental. Just softer. He said, when a young woman comes here asking for Unit 14, would I let her in, without making it hard for her? He said she would be tired. He said she would be alone. He said she would not know what she was walking into. And he asked if I would be kind. Corinne could not speak. She had been prepared for many things. She had not been prepared for that. Mrs. Adeyemi slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a copy of the lease. A payment history that ran 19 years and never once broke rhythm. And a small envelope with Corinne's name on it. Her name. In her father's handwriting. Not typed. Not printed. Written. She took the envelope, with fingers that felt very far away from the rest of her body. You don't have to open it now, Mrs. Adeyemi said. Corinne shook her head. I need to see the unit. Mrs. Adeyemi nodded. She reached under the desk and pulled out a small ring of keys and stood up. Follow me. The unit was at the back of the facility. A metal door. 10 feet wide. 20 feet deep. Nothing on the outside to distinguish it from any of the others except a small placard with the number 14. Mrs. Adeyemi handed Corinne the master key. Yours works too. But this one is easier the first time. She turned. She started walking back to the office. Slowly. The way she did everything. And then she stopped. She looked back over her shoulder. Your father was a careful man, Miss Vasska. Careful men do not spend 19 years on something without a reason. She walked back to the trailer. Corinne stood alone in the dust and the gravel and the last orange light of the day. She turned the key. She pulled up the door. And she stopped breathing. Boxes. Floor to ceiling. Wall to wall. in rows so neat they looked like a small city. Cardboard archival boxes. All the same size. All labeled in her father's careful, small handwriting. A filing cabinet against one wall. A flatbed cart. A dehumidifier plugged into the single outlet, humming softly, the low steady hum of a machine that had been running for a very long time. The unit was cool. Not cold. Just cool enough that the paper was safe. Corinne stepped inside. One step. Then another. She read the labels. Cedarwell County. Deed records. 1885, 1902. Cedarwell County. Deed records. 1903, 1919. Cedarwell County. Survey plats. 1887, 1910. Cedarwell County. Probate. 1901, 1935. Cedarwell County. Water rights. Homestead era, 1928. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. She walked down the aisle between the rows. Slowly. There were hundreds of boxes. Maybe 1,000. She did not know how long she stood there. She only knew that at some point she sat down on the concrete floor, right in the middle of the aisle, and put her hands on her knees, and stared at the labels on the boxes, and tried to understand what she was looking at. Her father had not been a historian. He had not been an archivist. He had run a one-man records management consulting business out of a small office in Missouri. For 31 years. Quietly. Alone. He had never once mentioned Cedarwell to her. Not once. And here was Cedarwell. Every deed. Every plat. Every probate filing. Every tax assessment. Every business incorporation. Every water rights filing. Going back to 1885. Sitting in a rented room. On Old Briar Road. In a town he had never lived in. She reached out. Very carefully. She pulled the lid off the box closest to her. Inside, manila folders. Alphabetized. Cross-referenced. A small index card taped to the inside of the lid, in her father's handwriting, listing exactly what was in the box, and where it had come from. Source: Cedarwell County Courthouse Basement, Retiring Clerk Ellsworth Peel, 2007. Duplicates purchased at retirement sale, $12. She lifted a folder. Opened it. A deed from 1889. Ink faded. Paper soft as cloth. A transfer of 80 acres, from a man named Peter Vanderberg to a widow named Alma Struthers. She could not stop looking at it. 137 years old. And it was in her lap. In a storage unit on Old Briar Road. In a town where nobody knew her name. She put the folder back. She closed the box. And then she remembered the envelope. She sat down on the concrete, with her back against the filing cabinet, and she opened it. Two things inside. The first was a letter. Folded twice. Thick paper. The second was another letter. Older. The paper yellowed at the edges. The envelope sealed. In her father's handwriting on the outside, 3 words. To my daughter. And underneath, a date. March 12, 2005. She was 14 in March of 2005. 14. Angry at him. Living with her mother in Missouri. Not speaking to him, because her parents had just separated, and she had chosen a side, and she was too young to know that sides were not what she thought they were. He had written her a letter. And he had never given it to her. For 20 years he had held on to it. He had kept it in this room. In this box. On this piece of ground. And he had waited. Corinne opened the newer letter first. Her hands were shaking now. She could feel it. She could not stop it. My dear Corinne. If you are reading this, it means I did not find a way to tell you in person. I am sorry for that. I meant to. Many times. I would sit at my kitchen table and I would rehearse the words, and then I would call you, and we would talk about your husband, or your gallery, or the weather, and the words would go back into the drawer. What is in this unit is not a hobby. It is not an eccentricity. It is a promise I made a long time ago to a woman you never met. Your grandmother. My mother-in-law. Your mother's mother. Her name was Ada Croft. She lived in Cedarwell, Kansas, until the summer of 1951. And in July of that year, the Kansas River flooded worse than it had ever flooded in recorded history. 10,000 square miles underwater. 500,000 people displaced. And in a small county called Cedarwell, the courthouse basement was destroyed. Every deed. Every survey. Every record of who had lived there and what they had owned and what they had loved. Your grandmother lost everything that summer. Not just her house. Not just her belongings. Her history. The paper record of her family's presence on that land, going back 3 generations. She spent the rest of her life trying to prove that her father had once owned 40 acres north of town. She died before she could prove it. I met your mother 8 years after Ada died. Your mother told me the story once. Only once. And she asked me never to bring it up again, because it hurt too much. I never did bring it up again. But I started this unit in March of 2005. I did not tell your mother. I did not tell you. I did not tell anyone. I started with 1 box. Deed records I bought at an estate sale in Cedarwell for $11. I told myself I would keep collecting until the record was whole again. Until nothing like what happened to Ada could happen to another family on that piece of ground. It took me 19 years. The record is whole now, sweetheart. Every parcel. Every family. Every water right. Every probate. Every quiet, ordinary human decision made on that piece of ground for 140 years. And I am leaving it to you. Not because you asked for it. Not because you deserve the burden. But because I have watched you your whole life, and I know what you are, even when you do not know it yourself. You are patient. You are careful. You do not need to be loud to be right. The land keeps the account, sweetheart. That is what Ada used to say, according to your mother. The land keeps the account. It only speaks softly. So you have to come close. And you have to be still. Come close. Be still. Everything inside is yours. I love you. Dad. Corinne put the letter down. She sat on the concrete floor of Unit 14, and she did not move, and she did not speak, and the dehumidifier hummed steadily beside her, and the last of the daylight faded through the open door. She thought about her grandmother Ada Croft, whom she had never met. She thought about her mother, who had never told her the story. She thought about her father, who had spent 19 years quietly rebuilding a memory that did not belong to him. Because he loved a woman who was already gone. Because he loved her mother. Because he loved her. She did not open the second letter. Not yet. She could not. She slept in the van that night. In the parking lot of the storage facility. Mrs. Adeyemi had offered her a cot in the trailer, but Corinne had said no thank you, and she had climbed into the back of the van, and she had lain down on top of one of her cardboard boxes, and she had stared at the ceiling of the van, and she had not cried. Not once. Because grief and shock are not the same thing. Grief is a feeling. Shock is a room you enter, and the door closes behind you, and you do not know how long you will be in there, or what will still be true when you come out. She was in that room. And she was thinking. doing what her father would have called the arithmetic. $30,000 in the bank. First and last on an apartment, $2,000. A used car, $6,000. Food and utilities for 6 months, about $7,000. That left about $15,000. And no income. And no job. And no family in Kansas except a grandmother in a grave somewhere. And a storage unit full of paper. Paper that belonged, in some legal and moral sense she had not yet worked out, to the people of Cedarwell County. She rolled over. She closed her eyes. She said out loud to the ceiling of the van, "Okay." Just that. Then she went to sleep. By the end of the 5th week, she had an apartment. 2 rooms above the pharmacy on Main Street. $320 a month. She had a car. A 2009 Honda Civic. Gray. 92,000 miles. $6,200 in cash. She had an office. Small. Above the hardware store. Above Wade Purnell's hardware store, actually. She would learn his name soon enough. In a way that would matter for years. The office had a single window that looked out over Main Street. A radiator that clanked. A single fluorescent light overhead. She scrubbed the floor. She washed the walls. She dragged in a folding table from Goodwill and a chair from a garage sale and a small metal filing cabinet. She put a hand-lettered sign in the window. Vasska Records Research. That was it. No slogan. No promise. No listing of services. Just her name and her work. The town noticed her. The way small towns notice something they have already decided not to take seriously. Wade Purnell ran the hardware store below her office. He was 58 years old. He had opinions about most things, and confidence in all of them. He drank coffee at Marge's diner every morning at 6:30. And on the morning after Corinne moved in, he sat down at the counter, and he said, loud enough for the whole diner to hear, "There's a woman upstairs above my store. Says she does records research. Whatever the hell that means." The waitress refilled his cup. "Divorce? Looks like it. Kids? Doesn't look like it. Family in town? Doesn't look like it." Wade took a long sip of his coffee. He set the cup down. "Won't last 3 months." By that evening the whole town had heard it. By the end of the week, Corinne Vasska had been placed in a category. Woman alone. Harmless. Won't last. She did not know she was in the category. She did not need to. Because she was upstairs. In the small office. With the fluorescent light. And the folding table. And the laptop. And a spreadsheet titled Inventory. Unit 14. Cedarwell County Archive. She was working. The cataloging took 4 months. She worked 6 days a week. Mornings at the storage unit. Afternoons at the office. Every box, one at a time. Every folder, one at a time. Every document, cross-referenced against her father's index cards, against a database she built, from scratch and rebuilt 3 times, when she realized her first version wasn't going to scale. She learned her father's system slowly. And then all at once. He had organized by county, by document type, by date range, by source. Every box had an index card taped to the inside of the lid, in his small, careful handwriting, listing what was inside, and where it had come from. Estate sales. Retiring clerks. Old law offices being dissolved. Church basements. Attics. Some of the boxes had been closed for 20 years. She was the first person to open them. She backed everything up. 3 cloud accounts. 2 external hard drives in separate locations. A printed master index at the apartment. Because her father's lesson was not lost on her. The whole reason this collection existed was that other people had trusted a single point of failure. She would not make that mistake. She spent down her reserves at a controlled rate. She took small jobs when they came. A genealogy request from a woman in Nebraska. A title search from a lawyer in Oklahoma. $200 here. $400 there. It slowed the clock. It did not stop it. The work itself was sustaining in a way she could not have explained to anyone who had not been broken open and found, unexpectedly, that there was still something they were genuinely good at. She could read her father's handwriting now, as easily as reading her own. What the records told her, collectively, was a story. A story of a county. In its own handwriting. Full of arguments, and land transfers, and marriages, and small businesses, and the slow geography of people settling on a particular piece of ground, and trying to build something. She had started to think of the archive as a conversation. A conversation that the land had been having with the people on it for 140 years. And she was the first person in a long time who was quiet enough to hear it. The woman who ran the small tax preparation business next door was named Ingrid Halvorsen. Ingrid was 74 years old. She had emigrated from East Germany 41 years earlier, and had never entirely lost the accent, or the seriousness, or the habit of saying difficult things gently. For 6 weeks, Ingrid did not knock on Corinne's door. She only nodded when they passed in the hallway. She only said good morning. She only observed. Then, one Tuesday in late April, she brought a tin of butter cookies to Corinne's office, and sat down in the client chair, and looked at the folding table, and the filing cabinet, and the printed spreadsheet taped to the wall. She held the silence for a full minute, before she spoke. The land does not lose what it knows. Corinne looked up. I'm sorry? The land does not lose what it knows. People lose it. The land keeps the account. But it speaks very softly. So you have to come close. And you have to be still. Otherwise, you cannot hear it. Corinne's hands went to the edge of the folding table. Because those were her father's words. Almost exactly. And she had told them to no one. Your father, Ingrid said, without waiting for a question, was a careful man. I never met him. But careful men leave a certain kind of quiet behind them. I recognize it. My own father was one. She stood up. She left the tin of cookies on the table. When you need to talk, I am next door. She walked out. Corinne sat there for a long time. Then she wrote the sentence on a small white index card, and she taped it to the wall above the folding table. The land keeps the account. Come close. Be still. She looked at it. She got back to work. Roland Keech showed up in the second week of March. He was 52. Well dressed in a way that felt slightly wrong for Cedarwell, as though his clothes were signaling membership in somewhere else. He drove a black Lexus, and he bought Corinne a coffee at Marge's, and he said he had heard she was new in town, and was doing some kind of records work. He said he admired her initiative. He said he imagined it was hard, being new, working alone, in a small office above a hardware store. He said his company, Keech Archive Group, had contracts with 11 counties in the state. And that they were building a proposal to be the 12th for Cedarwell. He said, with the tone of a man doing her a favor. I don't know what your inventory looks like, exactly. But if you'd ever consider selling to an operation that could really do it justice, I'd love to talk. Corinne looked at him across the table. She looked at his shoes. Expensive. His watch. More expensive. His smile. Practiced. Thank you for the coffee. My inventory is not for sale. He smiled wider. Of course. Of course. Just an idea. No pressure at all. He slid a business card across the table. She put it in her pocket, without looking at it. She said goodbye. She walked back to her office. And she thought, for the first time since arriving in Cedarwell, he knows something. She did not know what. She did not know how much. But he had come to her too quickly. And he had been too smooth. And he had known, without asking, that she had inventory worth buying. That night, she went home to the apartment above the pharmacy. She locked the door. She took his business card out of her pocket. Roland Keech, President and CEO. Keech Archive Group. Serving Kansas since 2004. Since 2004. The year before her father started the unit. She stared at the card for a long time. She whispered it again, to herself, okay. The flood came in April. It rained for 6 days straight. The Kansas River rose. The old drainage system in Cedarwell, the same one that had failed in 1951, the same one that had never really been fixed, only patched, failed again. Water came up out of the storm drains. It flooded the courthouse basement. It flooded the county records office. And it flooded, at exactly the same time, in the same 3-hour window, the basement of the county annex on Sutter Street, where the backup microfilm was stored. Corinne learned about the primary flood from the local paper. She sat at Marge's diner, with a cup of coffee. She read the article. Deeds, plats, tax records, 1940 forward, all destroyed. The county clerk was quoted as saying the backups were secure and will be reviewed shortly. Corinne closed the paper. She paid her check. She walked back to her office. And Ingrid Halvorsen was waiting for her, in the hallway, holding a look on her face that Corinne would remember for the rest of her life. Ingrid stepped inside. She closed the door. The backup is gone. Corinne went still. Gone how? The annex basement flooded at the same time. Same drainage system. One point of failure. How bad is it? Everything before 1975. Deeds. Plats. Water rights. Tax assessments. Probate. All of it. The county cannot prove who owns what. Going back generations. Corinne sat down on her folding chair. Very slowly. Because she was doing the arithmetic in her head. Everything in her father's storage unit. 1885 to 1975. Every category. Every parcel. Every family. She had it. She was the only person in the world who had it. Ingrid watched her face. She waited. Finally Corinne said, very quietly, how many people know what I have? You. Me. Mrs. Adeyemi. Your father. And your father is gone. Roland Keech doesn't know? Ingrid's eyes sharpened. Roland Keech has been in this county for 6 weeks longer than you have. He came looking for a records contract because he heard the county was in trouble. He did not know how much trouble. If he had, he would have moved faster. Corinne nodded. Slowly. She thought about the coffee at Marge's. She thought about the way he had said, I don't know what your inventory looks like, exactly. Exactly. That was the word. She said, to Ingrid, I'm not going to tell anyone. Not yet. Not the county. Not Keech. Not the paper. I'm going to keep working. And I'm going to wait. Ingrid nodded. For what? Corinne looked at the index card on the wall. For the moment, when Cedarwell needs to hear what the land remembers. And is willing to listen properly. Ingrid smiled. Just barely. Not with her mouth. With her eyes. Your father would be proud. She let herself out. That night, Corinne went back to the storage unit. Alone. In the dark. With a flashlight. She unlocked the door. She pulled it up. The dehumidifier hummed to greet her. The cool, still air. The rows of boxes. She walked to the back. To the very last row. To a box she had catalogued 3 weeks earlier, marked in her father's handwriting. Personal. Do not distribute GV. She had left it for last. She had not been ready. She was ready now. She pulled the box down. She sat on the concrete floor. She lifted the lid. Inside, a leather-bound journal. Dark brown. Worn at the corners. And underneath it, a stack of letters. Tied with string. Some addressed to her. Some addressed to her mother. All in her father's handwriting. All unmailed. She lifted the journal. She opened it. The first page was dated March 12, 2005. She read. Today I begin the real work of my life. No one knows. No one will know for many years. Perhaps no one will ever know. But there is a small county in Kansas, where my mother-in-law once lived. Where she lost everything in a flood in 1951. And I am going to do what I can, quietly, month by month, to make sure that what happened to her does not happen again to another family on that piece of ground. I do not know how long it will take. I do not know if I will finish. I do not know if anyone will ever need what I am gathering. But I know that the land keeps the account. And I know that someone should be listening. Corinne closed the journal. She sat on the concrete floor. In the dark. Beside the humming dehumidifier. In a 10 by 20 storage unit on Old Briar Road. And she understood, for the first time in her life, what her father had been. He had not been a records consultant. He had been in love. With a woman who was already gone. With a woman he had never met. With a promise he had made to her memory, and kept, quietly, for 19 years, until he died. And now the promise was hers. She sat with it for a long time. The dehumidifier hummed. The night pressed against the walls of the unit. Somewhere outside, in the town of Cedarwell, 43 people were about to find out that the paper memory of their lives had been destroyed. They just did not know it yet. Neither did Roland Keech. But Corinne Vasska did. She read the journal every night for 3 weeks. Slowly. 1 page. Sometimes 2. Never more. Because her father's handwriting was small and careful, and she wanted the entries to last. She sat on the small couch in the apartment above the pharmacy. She made a cup of tea. She turned off the television, which she never watched anyway. And she opened the journal. And she read. And what she learned, entry by entry, month by month, year by year, was that her father had come to Cedarwell 3 times, before he died. The first time in 2009. 4 years into the project. He had driven from Missouri in a single day. 9 hours. He had parked on a street called Chestnut Avenue, and he had walked to the corner, and he had stood in front of a small white house, with a porch swing, and a lilac bush by the mailbox. The house where Ada Croft had lived. He had not knocked. He had not gone up the walk. He had stood on the sidewalk for 11 minutes. And then he had walked back to his car. And he had driven home. The entry ended with a single line. She loved that porch swing. Julie told me once. I did not go up. I did not want the family, who lives there now, to be afraid. Corinne read that line 4 times. Julie was her mother's name. Her father had known her mother's stories about the porch swing. Her mother had told him. He had remembered. 19 years later, she was reading about it in a journal her mother had never seen. She closed the book. She put her hand on the cover. she cried. Not loudly. Just steadily. For about 8 minutes. Until her tea got cold. Then she wiped her face. And she went to bed. Because it was Wednesday. And she had work in the morning. The email came on a Tuesday in June. It was from a paralegal in Topeka. Subject line, long shot, Cedarwell County Records Inquiry. Corinne opened it, while eating a sandwich at her folding table. Ms. Vasska. I work for Cormac Redland, a title attorney at Redland and Bookman in Topeka. Mr. Redland has been trying for 8 months to resolve a land dispute involving 312 acres of farmland in northern Cedarwell County. The original transfer document dates to 1923 and was, we believe, in the courthouse records that were destroyed in the April flood. I found your business through a genealogy forum. I don't know what your holdings look like. But I thought I would ask. Corinne set the sandwich down. She opened her database. She typed the parcel number. 3 matches came up. A deed. A survey plat. A tax assessment. All from 1923. She sat there for a moment. Just staring at the screen. Then she pulled the physical folders. She scanned them. She certified the digital copies. She wrote a short email back. Attached are the documents you requested. My standard research fee is $125 per hour plus a document retrieval fee. Total for this request, $410. Invoice attached. She sent it. Her phone rang 47 minutes later. The voice on the other end was slow. Careful. A man in his 60s, she guessed. Someone who had been practicing law for a long time, and had the particular kind of patience that came with it. Ms. Vasska. Cormac Redland. Yes. I have been on this dispute for 8 months. I have spent, approximately, $14,000 of my firm's money trying to reconstruct documentation. Yesterday morning I was going to write to my client and tell her the case was over. She waited. You found the deed in 2 hours. Yes. He paused. Ms. Vasska. What else do you have? She looked at the row of index cards on her wall. She looked at the small photograph she had propped up beside her laptop the week before. Her father, at 50. Standing on a dock in Missouri. Squinting into the sun. I have comprehensive holdings for Cedarwell County. Deeds. Plats. Probate. Water rights. Tax assessments. Court records. Business incorporations. Going back to 1885. The silence on the other end went longer this time. Ms. Vasska. I would like to write a letter. A letter? On my firm's letterhead. Attesting to the professional quality of your archive and your retrieval service. I will send you a signed copy. I will send another copy to the Cedarwell County Clerk's office. I will not charge you. And I will not ask for anything in return. I am doing it because it is true. And because I think it will matter to you shortly. Corinne swallowed. Why do you think it will matter shortly? Cormac Redland exhaled. Because I have been practicing law in this state for 34 years. And I have seen what happens when a county loses its records. It does not stay quiet for long. And when the noise starts, people like you get eaten by people like Roland Keech. Unless someone from outside gets there first. Corinne's throat tightened. How do you know Roland Keech? I have known Roland Keech for 11 years. In a professional capacity. Which is a phrase I am using very deliberately. She waited. He did not elaborate. Not on that call. But he mailed the letter. It arrived 4 days later. 2 pages. On heavy cream letterhead. Signed in blue ink. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she filed it in a drawer where she would know where it was. Idelle Braithwood was 81 years old the first time she walked into Corinne's office. She was small, thin, wearing a cardigan the color of a robin's egg even though it was 93 degrees outside. She had a paper grocery bag folded flat under her arm. And she had a look on her face that Corinne had come to recognize. The look of someone who has been trying to solve a problem alone for a very long time, and has finally decided to ask a stranger. She sat down in the client chair. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at Corinne over the top of a pair of reading glasses that had one of the temples repaired with clear tape. My name is Idelle Braithwood. Corinne Vasska. I know. I read the sign. Corinne smiled. Just a little. How can I help you, Mrs. Braithwood? Idelle folded her hands. My father owned 40 acres north of Cedarwell. He died in 1944. In a meatpacking accident in Wichita. I was 15 months old. I never knew him. My mother tried, for years, to prove that we inherited the land. She could never find the paperwork. She died in 1971 still trying. Idelle paused. She looked down at her hands. I am 81 years old. I do not need 40 acres. I have a small pension. I have a small house. I do not need the money. She looked up. But I would like to know if my father owned that land. Corinne nodded. Very slowly. Because she had been in this office for 9 months. And she had done maybe 40 jobs. Small ones. Genealogy. Title searches. And every one of them had mattered to somebody. But she had not been prepared for this. What was your father's name, Mrs. Braithwood? Elias Braithwood. Corinne typed it into the database. 3 matches came back. She pulled the physical folders. She spread them on the folding table. Idelle leaned forward. The first was a deed. 1938, Elias Braithwood, 40 acres north of the county road, purchased from a widow named Constance Merriweather for $620. Idelle put her hand over her mouth. The second was a tax assessment. 1943, paid. Idelle made a small sound. The third was a probate filing. 1945, Elias Braithwood, deceased. Land held in trust for heirs pending resolution. Idelle was crying now. Silently. Not the crying of a woman who has just lost something. The crying of a woman who has just found something. Corinne got her a tissue. She poured her a glass of water. She let her sit. And then Corinne noticed something. Because in the probate folder, tucked between 2 other documents, was an envelope. Handwritten. Addressed to my wife. Dated April 8, 1944. Corinne lifted it. Very carefully. She turned it over. It was sealed. It had never been opened. She held it out. Mrs. Braithwood. This was in your father's file. Idelle looked at it. For a long time. She did not take it. Whose handwriting is that? I don't know. But it's dated 3 weeks before he died. Idelle's hand shook. She took the envelope. She turned it over. She looked at the front. She looked at the back. My mother never got this. No, ma'am. It ended up in the county records. Probably by mistake. Sometime in 1944 or 1945. Idelle held the envelope in both hands. She did not open it. She could not. Not there. She stood up. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out a folded $20 bill. How much do I owe you? Corinne looked at the envelope in her hands. Corinne looked at the wall, where the index card said the land keeps the account. Come close. Be still. Nothing, Mrs. Braithwood. Adele shook her head. I insist. So do I. Adele held the 20 for maybe 8 seconds. Just looking at Corinne. Then she put it back in her pocket. You are a good young woman. She walked out. She would come back every Wednesday for the next 6 months. She would bring a small tin of something baked. She would sit for a half hour. She would not always speak. And Corinne would look forward to Wednesdays in a way she had not looked forward to anything since the divorce. Roland Keech came back on a Monday in mid-July. He was different this time. The suit was still pressed. The shoes were still polished. But the warmth was gone. He walked into her office without knocking. He set his briefcase on her folding table. He opened it. He took out a single sheet of paper. He set it in front of her. $80,000. Full transfer of the archive and associated intellectual property. This offer is generous, given the uncertain legal status of materials acquired through private channels. Corinne looked at the paper. She looked at him. She did not touch it. Mr. Keech. My archive is not for sale. Ms. Vasska. Let me be direct. I know what you have. You know what I have. Comprehensive holdings for Cedarwell County. Deeds. Plats. Water rights. Going back to 1885. Her chest went tight. Because that was the number. 1885, she had told exactly 2 people that number. Her father, who was dead, and Delphine Rasker, the county clerk. In a private meeting. 6 days earlier. She looked at Roland Keech. She did not let anything show on her face. She had learned that from her father too. The habit of not showing. $80,000 is very generous of you, Mr. Keech. It reflects fair market value. For a one-person operation, with uncertain legal standing? Yes. Then I have to decline. He smiled. Just a little. Ms. Vasska. I am going to say this only once. And I would like you to consider it carefully. Please. The county is going to need those records. Very soon. The county is going to want to solve its problem quickly. When it does, it will look for a professional partner with the resources and the reputation to manage a project of this scale. That partner will not be you. That partner will be me. And when that partner is me, the county will exercise whatever legal authority it needs to make your holdings available. She kept her hands still on the table. He continued. So you have 2 choices. Take $80,000 today. Or spend the next 2 years in litigation. Losing. And watching your inheritance walk out the door for nothing. He waited. She looked at his shoes. At his watch. At his soft hands. Mr. Keech. I have a letter from Cormac Redland at Redland & Bookman. His face did not change. But something behind his eyes did. Just slightly. Cormac Redland is a title attorney. Yes. He is not the county. No. But he is willing to attest that the archive is a privately assembled collection of legitimately acquired documents. That my father has documentation of every acquisition source. That I have organized and preserved those documents in accordance with professional standards. And that any attempt by the county to seize those materials would fail under Kansas law. The silence in her office had a weight to it now. Roland Keech closed his briefcase. Slowly. He picked it up. He looked at her one last time. You should think carefully, Ms. Vasska. I have thought. He walked out. She sat there for a long time. She was shaking. Just her hands. Just a little. She put them flat on the folding table. She waited for them to stop. Then she called Ingrid. He knew the date range. Ingrid was quiet. So he has been very attentive. Yes. And now I know exactly what his attention is worth. Ingrid paused again. Corinne. Move the physical backups. Move them tonight. Corinne moved them that night. 2 boxes to Ingrid's house. 2 boxes to a bank safety deposit box in Manhattan, Kansas, an hour's drive north. 2 boxes to a friend of her father's in Missouri, whom she had never met, but whose name was in the journal, marked with a note that said he can be trusted. 2 boxes to Cormac Redland's law firm in Topeka, in a locked cabinet Mr. Redland had personally cleared for her, when she called him at 9 o'clock at night and asked. She did not sleep for 2 days. But she felt, for the first time, since April, that she had done what her father would have done. She had made a system, with no single point of failure. The fire happened 3 weeks later. The temporary annex the county had set up in June, a small, rented warehouse on the edge of town, where they were trying to consolidate what was left of the surviving physical records, burned to the ground on a Wednesday night in late July. The fire started around 1 in the morning. By dawn, the building was gone. The county fire marshal ruled it electrical. Faulty wiring in an old panel that had not been up to code. The insurance adjusters wrote it up. The paper ran a small article on the front page. The county commissioners made a statement about the tragedy of the situation. Corinne read the article at Marge's diner. She was drinking coffee. She was alone at the counter. She read it 3 times. Then she paid her check. And she walked outside. And she stood on the sidewalk in front of the diner. And she looked across the street. And Roland Keech was sitting in a car. Parked across the street. Windows down. Sipping coffee. Watching the diner. Watching her. Their eyes met. He did not smile. He did not nod. He just held her gaze. For maybe 4 seconds. And then he raised his coffee cup. Just slightly. Just enough to be seen. And he drove away. Corinne stood on the sidewalk. She could not, for a moment, remember how to move. Because she understood. She understood exactly what he had just told her. She understood that she had no proof. She understood that the fire marshal's report would say electrical. She understood that Roland Keech had not lit a match. He had not needed to. She walked back to her office. Very slowly. She sat down at her folding table. She opened her father's journal to a random page. She just needed to see his handwriting. The page she opened said, "There are men who see a public loss and turn it into a private gain. They do not create the loss. They only wait for it. And then they arrive. Do not confuse them with businessmen. They are something older, and something smaller, and something that has been in the world for a very long time." She read it 3 times. Then she closed the journal. And she got back to work. Marcus Ojo showed up at the storage unit 2 days later. He was 24. Tall. Quiet. Wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and a pair of running shoes that had seen a lot of running. He knocked on the open door of the unit, while Corinne was cataloging a box in the back row. "Ms. Vasska?" She looked up. "Yes. My aunt sent me." "Ingrid Halvorsen." Corinne straightened. She wiped her hands on her jeans. She walked to the door. "You're Ingrid's nephew?" "Great-nephew. My grandmother is her sister. I have a question about my family's land title. She said you might be able to help." Corinne took him inside. She sat him in the folding chair. She pulled up the database. He gave her the parcel number. She found the deed in about 6 minutes. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, without looking up, "Do you need help?" She blinked. "With what?" "With all this. The cataloging. The database. The retrieval. I saw the unit when I came in. I saw the office. I know what a one-person operation looks like." She looked at him. "I can't pay you. I didn't ask to be paid." "Then why?" He looked around the office. At the printed spreadsheet on the wall. At the tin of Ingrid's cookies on the corner of the folding table. At the small photograph of her father on the dock in Missouri. "Because the work makes sense to me. And most work doesn't." She watched his face for a moment. "Come tomorrow at 8. I'll show you the system." He came at 7:45. He stayed for 6 hours the first day. He came back the next day. And the day after. Every day, for the rest of that week. He did not ask for payment. He did not ask for hours. He just came. And on the third day, Corinne noticed something. He was standing in the back row of the storage unit, looking at a wall of boxes. Just looking. He had a small notebook in his hand. He was making marks in it. Every so often, he would move a box. Very slightly. From one position to another. And then he would step back. And he would look at the whole wall. And he would nod. And he would move another box. She walked back to him. "What are you doing?" He did not turn around. The Braithwood family lived next to the Meriwether family, from 1902 to 1938. But they don't touch in your system. The Braithwood box is on aisle 4. The Meriwether box is on aisle 9. If someone comes in asking about a boundary dispute, you have to walk to 2 different places. Right. They should touch. Everyone who lived next to each other should touch. The system should feel like the map of the county. She stared at him. "Marcus. That would take months to reorganize." "I know. I'm not saying to do it now. I'm just saying, when I look at the boxes, I see who lived next to who. And it hurts my brain that they're not near each other." She did not know what to say. Because he had just described, in one sentence, something she had been circling for 9 months, without being able to name. Her father's system was chronological. Organized by category and date. It made sense on paper. But it did not make sense, as a place. And what Marcus was seeing, what he was drawing in his little notebook, was a place. "How much would I have to pay you to keep coming?" "I don't know." "I mean it, Marcus." He turned around. He looked at her. "Whatever you can afford. I trust you." She almost cried. She did not. But she almost did. She hired him that afternoon. $15 an hour. All she could afford. He did not negotiate. He just said thank you, and asked when she wanted him to start. She said Monday. He came at 7:30. Roland Keech came back the third time in early August. He did not knock. He walked into her office. He set a paper on her folding table. $200,000. Corinne looked at the paper. She looked at him. No. He did not react. He had expected it. "Ms. Vasska. I am going to make things difficult for you, if you continue to position yourself as an obstacle." "I am not an obstacle. I am a records professional doing my work. You are the last thing standing between me and a 5-year contract with this county. I am also the last thing standing between this county and losing what remains of its history to a man who watches buildings burn." The word burn did something to his face. Just for a moment. Then it was gone. He picked up the paper. He put it back in his briefcase. You should not have said that. I should not have had to. He walked out. She walked to the small window that looked over Main Street. She watched him get into his black Lexus. She watched him drive away. Then she pulled the shade. And she called Cormac Redland in Topeka. Mr. Redland. I need to tell you what he just said. And I need to tell you what he did 3 weeks ago. And I need your advice. Cormac Redland was quiet for a moment. Ms. Vasska. I want you to know something. Yes. I have not been entirely truthful with you. 6 weeks ago, the Kansas Attorney General's office contacted my firm regarding a preliminary inquiry into Keech Archive Group. My firm has been retained as consulting counsel to assist with that inquiry. There are 3 other counties in Kansas where records were lost: floods, 1 storage failure, 1 fire, under circumstances that were not, in retrospect, entirely explicable by the initial investigation. In all 3 cases, Mr. Keech's company was awarded a records contract shortly afterward. Corinne's chest went cold. The inquiry is confidential. I am not supposed to be telling you this. But I am telling you this because I need you to understand that what is happening in Cedarwell is not the first time. And I need you to be very, very careful for the next several weeks. How careful? Do not go to the storage unit alone at night. Do not open the door for anyone you do not know. And write down every conversation you have with him in as much detail as you can remember as soon as it happens. If we ever get to a courtroom, that record will matter. She wrote it all down that night. Every conversation. Every phone call. Every visit. She dated each entry. She signed each page. She put the record in a folder. She labeled it R.K. She put the folder in her filing cabinet. She locked the cabinet. And she went home. The drought broke in the wrong direction on August 15th. Which is to say, it did not break. It deepened. Every well shallower than 400 feet in Cedarwell County went dry in a 3-week span. Crops failed. Livestock operations consolidated or gave up. The County Water Authority announced emergency allocation protocols. And into the chaos came the wave. Emergency loan applications. Property lien filings. Insurance claims. Estate settlements that had been pending for months, and now suddenly needed to close. Water rights disputes over who had prior appropriation on a river that had never been this low in living memory. All of it required documentation. Documentation that Cedarwell no longer had. By the 3rd week of August, the courthouse switchboard was jammed. Delphine Rasker, the county clerk, had not slept a full night in a month. And on a Thursday afternoon in that 3rd week, Wade Purnell walked up the stairs to Corinne's office. He was 58 years old. Ran the hardware store on the ground floor. Had said, 10 months earlier, at Marge's diner, that she wouldn't last 3 months. She had heard about it. Ingrid had told her, gently, after she had been in town for 6 months. Corinne had said nothing. She had filed it. The way she filed everything. He knocked. Very softly. Which was unlike him. She opened the door. He was standing there, with his hat in his hands. Not on his head. In his hands. Held down in front of his belt buckle. Miss Vasska. Mr. Purnell. I hear you might have some of the old county records. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She did not say a single thing that any part of her, from any part of the last 10 months, wanted to say. Come in, Mr. Purnell. What do you need? He came in. He sat down. Slowly. His hat still in his hands. I need a 1987 tax assessment for my farm parcel. For the insurance adjuster. And anything you might have on a water rights filing my grandfather made in 1948. My well went dry 2 weeks ago. And the neighbor is pumping. And I need to know if he has the right. She opened the database. She had both. She pulled the folders. She scanned the tax assessment. She scanned the water rights filing. She printed certified copies. She stapled them. She slid them across the folding table. $200, Mr. Purnell. That's my standard fee. He nodded. He reached into his back pocket. He pulled out a folded stack of bills. He counted out 200. He set it on the table. He stood up. He put on his hat. He got to the door. He stopped. He did not turn around. He said to the doorframe, "Ma'am." "Yes, Mr. Purnell. When you first came to town, I said some things about you at the diner. That weren't fair. I want you to know that I know they weren't fair. And I want you to know that I'm sorry." Her breath caught. "Thank you for saying so, Mr. Purnell." He nodded. He did not turn around. "Ma'am, I don't know what all is up here. But if there's other people in this county who need what you got, you should know they're going to come. My cousin needs a probate record. My neighbor needs a survey. And they don't know yet that they can come. But they will." He left. She stood there. Her hand still on the door. Because he was right. By that evening, she had 7 requests in her inbox. By the next morning, 16. By Friday afternoon of that week, 41. Ingrid came over on Friday evening, after the last client had left. She sat in the client chair. She did not bring cookies this time. She just sat. The land kept the account. You were still enough to hear it. Corinne shook her head slowly. My father did the real work. He started the account. You understood what it was worth. And you held it steady. That is its own kind of labor. Ingrid stood up. She got as far as the door. Then Corinne's phone chimed. A text message. From a number she did not recognize. She picked up the phone. She read the message. She read it again. She set the phone down. Very carefully. On the folding table. Ingrid was watching her. Corinne. Corinne slid the phone across the table. Ingrid put on her glasses. She read the message. Community Center meeting August 22nd. You have 3 days to sell to Keech for $60,000. Otherwise your storage unit will have an accident, same as the annex. Ingrid took her glasses off. She folded them. She put them in her pocket. He has made a mistake. Corinne looked up. What? He has put it in writing. Ingrid picked up the phone. She turned it toward Corinne. He has put it in writing, Corinne. On your phone. Which is a device that you own and which is subject to subpoena and which is now evidence. Corinne stared at the phone. Ingrid. Yes. I need you to call Delphine Rasker for me. I do not trust myself to sound calm right now. Ingrid nodded. She picked up the phone. She stepped into the hallway. She called. Corinne stood at the window of her office. She looked out at Main Street. It was almost dark. In the diner across the street, someone had turned on a small string of white bulbs that hung above the counter. She thought about her father. She thought about her grandmother Ada Croft. She thought about the porch swing on Chestnut Avenue. She thought about the 11 minutes her father had stood on the sidewalk and refused to go up to the door. She thought about the community center meeting in 3 days. And she made her decision. She was not going to sell. She was not going to be frightened. She was going to stand up on Saturday morning, in that community center, in front of 43 people, and she was going to say what her father had been saying quietly for 19 years, without anyone hearing him. She turned away from the window. She opened her laptop. She began to write. She had 3 days. She spent the first day on the phone. She called Cormac Redland at 7:15 in the morning. She read him the text message. Word for word. Slowly. She heard him breathing on the other end. She heard the sound of a pen being uncapped. Corinne. Yes. Do not delete that message. I know. Do not respond to it. I know. I am driving to Cedarwell tomorrow morning. I will be in your office by noon. I want to be in the room on Saturday. You don't have to. Corinne. I have wanted to be in a room with Roland Keech in a professional capacity for 11 years. Please do not take this away from me. She almost laughed. Thank you, Mr. Redland. Cormac. Cormac. She hung up. Because Delphine Rasker had come to her office at 11 o'clock the night before. Alone. With a folder. She had knocked on Corinne's apartment door, upstairs above the pharmacy. Corinne had opened the door in her bathrobe. Delphine had stood in the hallway, with her hair uncombed, and her face, without makeup, and a look that Corinne would remember for the rest of her life. Delphine had held out the folder. My husband works for Roland Keech. Corinne had not moved. He works in their accounting department. It is not a big job. But it is a job with insurance. And my daughter has a condition. When Roland asked my husband to ask me for information, and I refused, they said the insurance would be reevaluated. Which I understood as the threat it was. I gave them one number. The date range. 1885, that was all I gave them. I have not slept since. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to read what is in this folder. She had handed Corinne the folder. She had turned around. She had walked down the stairs and out into the night. Corinne had gone inside. She had sat at her small kitchen table. She had opened the folder. $60,000 to Corinne Vasska in exchange for a full transfer of the archive. 20 years of exclusive access fees retained by Keech Archive Group. At current demand levels, which the proposal helpfully projected, Roland Keech's share, over 20 years would be somewhere between $2.1 and $3.4 million. He was offering her 3 cents on the dollar. And on line 12 of the proposal, in the middle of a paragraph describing the scope of the archive, was a sentence that read: The collection contains comprehensive deed records and water rights documentation covering 411 individual parcels, with historical documentation extending to 1885. 411. Corinne had sat at her kitchen table for a long time. Because 411 was a number that existed nowhere in the world except on her laptop. In a database she had built herself. In a field she had populated 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon, while eating a tuna sandwich. She had never spoken it aloud. Never printed it. Never emailed it. Which meant somebody had been in her database. Not Delphine. Delphine had given up the date range. Not the parcel count. Someone else. She had called Marcus at 7 that morning. She had asked him to come to the office. She had told him what she needed. Marcus had come at 7:30. He had brought his laptop. He had spent 4 hours going through her access logs, her router history, and the backup traces on her cloud accounts. At 11:40, he had turned his screen toward her. July 2nd. 2:43 in the afternoon. Someone logged into your dashboard from an IP address in Wichita. They queried 3 tables. One of them was the parcel count. Do you have the IP? I do. I ran a reverse lookup. It's registered to a small consulting firm, which is a shell, which is owned by a holding company, which is owned by Keech Archive Group. Corinne had closed her eyes. She had opened them. Print everything. Every page. In triplicate. One copy for me. One for Cormac. One for the folder in the filing cabinet. Marcus had printed everything. And Corinne had spent the second day writing. She wrote longhand. On lined paper. With one of her father's old pens. She had found the pen in his briefcase the day she arrived. It was a black cartridge pen. Simple. Well made. She had thought about throwing it away in those first weeks, because looking at it hurt. She had not thrown it away. She had cleaned it. She had filled it. She had used it every day for 19 months. And now she was using it to write the thing that mattered most. She wrote for 6 hours. She did not write a speech. She wrote a decision. She wrote what she was going to do. She wrote what she was going to say. She wrote what she was going to offer the county in place of what Roland Keech had proposed. She did not write it for the audience. She wrote it for her father. For Ada. For the widow Alma Struthers, who had bought 80 acres in 1889 for a price Corinne knew, because she had held the deed in her lap. For the Braithwoods. For every family, whose name lived in a box on Old Briar Road, because a man in Missouri had believed that 140 years of quiet human decisions were worth preserving. She wrote it for Idell. Because Idell had come by the office on Thursday afternoon. Uninvited. With a small brown paper bag. Corinne had let her in. Idell had sat down in the client chair. She had put the paper bag on the folding table. I brought you something. Corinne had opened the bag. Inside was an old photograph album. Cloth cover. Frayed at the edges. Idell had pushed it across the table. This belonged to my mother. She kept photographs of the neighbors, from the years my father was alive. 1938 to 1944. I have looked at these pictures for 78 years. I never knew what to do with them. But last night I was looking at them again. And I thought you might want to see one. Idell had reached across the table. She had opened the album to a page near the back. She had put her finger on a small black and white photograph. Corinne had leaned forward. The photograph showed a farmyard. A small white farmhouse in the background. A porch. A lilac bush by the mailbox. 4 people standing in the yard. A man in overalls. A woman in a checkered dress. A little girl, maybe 3 years old, holding a doll. And behind them, standing a few feet back, looking off to the side of the camera, a young woman. Dark hair. Tied back. A summer dress. A hand at her waist. She was not the subject of the photograph. She was a neighbor. A neighbor who had wandered into the frame. Corinne had looked at the young woman. For a very long time. Because Corinne's mother had looked exactly like that at 40. And Corinne had looked exactly like that at 30. And her mother had told her, once, in a rare moment of talking about the past, that everyone in the family had said Corinne looked like her grandmother Ada. Corinne had put her hand to her mouth. Idell. Yes. Is that Ada? Idell had nodded. Ada Croft. She lived on Chestnut Avenue. My mother said she was the kindest woman on the block. She had a porch swing. My mother used to sit on it and drink lemonade with her in the summer. Corinne had not spoken for a full minute. How did you know? Idell had smiled. Very gently. I did not know. Not for certain. Not until this week. When Wade Purnell told his wife, at the diner on Tuesday, that Miss Vasca's grandmother had been in the 1951 flood. His wife told my niece. My niece told me. And I remembered the name. Because Ada Croft was the woman whose porch swing my mother sat on. Corinne had put the album down. Very carefully. She had put her hands flat on the folding table. May I keep this photograph? You may keep the whole album, dear. I cannot take the whole album. You can. Because I have looked at it for 78 years. And it is time for it to belong to someone who knew her. I did not know her. Idelle had reached across the table. She had put her small hand on top of Corinne's. You know her now. Corinne had cried in front of Idelle. Not much. Just enough. Idelle had squeezed her hand and then let go, because Idelle knew, the way old women know these things, that Corinne needed to be alone with it. Idelle had picked up her purse. She had walked to the door. She had turned around. Saturday. What time? 9 in the morning. I will be there. She had left. Corinne had put the photograph of Ada on the mantel in her apartment that night. On the small mantel above the electric fireplace, that did not work. She had looked at it for a long time. I found you, Grandma. Then she had gone to bed. She had slept, for the first time in 3 weeks, all the way through the night. Saturday morning was 104 degrees at 7 a.m., 16th day in a row. Corinne wore a plain navy dress. Not new. Not a costume. Just what she had. She wore her mother's small pearl earrings. She wore the shoes she had bought at the outlet mall in June. She put her hair up. She took the leather briefcase. She put inside it her father's journal. The signed letter from Cormac Redland. The folder from Delphine. The IP address report from Marcus. The photograph of Ada, in a small paper sleeve. And the 6 pages she had written on Thursday, on lined paper, with her father's pen. She walked out of the apartment. She walked down the stairs. She walked across Main Street, past the diner, where a small group of people were watching her, through the window, with expressions she had not yet learned to name. She walked into the community center. Ingrid was in the 5th row. Idelle was 2 rows behind her, in a lavender cardigan, holding her purse in her lap. Wade Purnell was in the middle of the room, sitting up very straight, wearing a clean shirt. Marcus was standing in the back, near the coffee table, holding a folder. Delphine Rasker was in the 2nd row, on the aisle, and her eyes did not lift from her hands. Roland Keech was in the front row. Cormac Redland was in the last row, reading a newspaper. Very casually. His briefcase on the seat beside him. He had walked in 10 minutes earlier, and had chosen his seat, with a slow, deliberate care that Roland Keech had not yet noticed. The county commissioner stood at the folding table at the front. He tapped a microphone that did not work. He gave up on the microphone. He raised his voice. Ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. The room quieted. We are here to discuss the ongoing records crisis in our county. 2 proposals have been submitted this morning. The first, from Mr. Roland Keech of Keech Archive Group. The second, from Ms. Corinne Vasska of Vasska Records Research. He nodded. Mr. Keech. If you would. Roland Keech stood up. He walked to the folding table. He placed a stack of copies of his proposal on the corner. He smiled. He began. He spoke for 15 minutes. He was good. He was practiced. He talked about partnership. About professional standards. About sustainable solutions. He said the number. $60,000. He said it warmly. As if it were a gift. He sat down. The commissioner nodded. Ms. Vasska. Corinne stood up. She walked to the folding table. She set the leather briefcase down. She placed her 6 sheets of lined paper on the surface. She did not sit. She did not smile. She looked at Roland Keech. I am not going to accept Mr. Keech's proposal. Roland Keech's face did not change. But something in the room did. I have read it carefully. I have done the arithmetic. And the arithmetic is very clear. At current demand levels, Mr. Keech's share of access fees over 20 years will be somewhere between $2 and $3 million. My share, under his proposal, is $60,000. That is not a fair licensing arrangement. That is 3 cents on the dollar. The commissioner opened his mouth. He closed it. But before I explain what I am going to propose instead, I need to say something about how I know Mr. Keech drafted his proposal in the way that he did. She lifted the top sheet of paper from her stack. On line 12 of his proposal, Mr. Keech describes the archive as containing comprehensive documentation covering 411 individual parcels. The room was very quiet. That number, 411, appears in exactly one place in the world. It appears in a database. On my laptop. In my office. Above the hardware store. I entered it myself on a Tuesday in May, at approximately 2:40 in the afternoon. I have never spoken it aloud. I have never printed it. I have never emailed it. She paused. I would like to know how Mr. Keech obtained it. She looked at Roland Keech. Roland Keech looked at the commissioner. The figure was estimated from publicly available information. Corinne shook her head. The figure cannot be estimated from publicly available information. It is a very specific count, matching the entries in a private database to the parcel. I would like to know, Mr. Keech, where the number came from. Roland Keech said nothing. Delphine Rasker stood up. Her voice was small. But it carried. Where did the number come from, Roland? The whole room turned to look at her. Roland Keech did not answer. Delphine looked at the commissioner. 6 weeks ago, my husband, who works in the accounting department at Keech Archive Group, told me that Roland Keech wanted information from the county clerk's office regarding Miss Vasska's archive. I refused. I refused for 4 weeks. During those 4 weeks, my daughter's medical insurance was placed under re-evaluation by the company. At the end of the 4th week, I gave Roland the date range. 1885, that was all I gave him. She looked at Corinne. I did not give him the parcel count. I do not know how he got it. But I know that on July 2nd, at 2:43 in the afternoon, Roland Keech told my husband that he had taken care of the details. I did not know what he meant. Now I do. She sat back down. Roland Keech stood up. This is a serious accusation, Ms. Rasker. I would advise you to consider your position. Cormac Redland stood up in the back row. He folded his newspaper. Mr. Keech. Roland Keech turned. For the first time, that morning, something moved in his face that had not been rehearsed. You do not know me. My name is Cormac Redland. I am a title attorney with the firm of Redland and Bookman in Topeka. I am also, currently, consulting counsel to the Kansas Attorney General's office. The room went completely still. For the last 6 weeks, our firm has been assisting a preliminary inquiry into Keech Archive Group. Specifically, into the coincidence, in 3 separate Kansas counties, over the last 7 years, of a catastrophic loss of physical records, 1 flood, 1 storage failure, 1 fire, followed within 90 days by the awarding of a records management contract to your company. Following those contracts, your company obtained privately held archival materials from local vendors at prices between 4 and 11% of their assessed market value. He walked forward. Slowly. Down the center aisle. This morning, Ms. Vasska has presented evidence of unauthorized access to a private database owned by her business. Ms. Rasker has presented sworn testimony that her employment and her family's medical insurance were used as leverage to extract information from her office. And Ms. Vasska has in her possession a text message sent to her phone from a number registered to a subsidiary of your company, threatening the destruction of her archive if she did not agree to the terms of your proposal. He reached the front of the room. He stopped beside Corinne. Mr. Keech, I am not arresting you today. That is not my job. But at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, I am filing an emergency petition with the Attorney General's office to add Cedarwell County to the active investigation. I would suggest, sir, that you obtain counsel. Roland Keech stood there. For a long moment. The ceiling fans turned. The room breathed. He picked up his briefcase. He walked out. Through the side door. Nobody called after him. Nobody followed. The room did not applaud. It did something better. It exhaled. 42 people, all at once, releasing a breath they had been holding for months. For some of them, for years. Corinne stood at the folding table. She picked up her 6 sheets of lined paper. And she began to speak. Not about Roland Keech. About her father. She told them about the storage unit. About the 19 years of monthly rent. About the March 12, 2005 journal entry. About Ada Croft, who had lived on Chestnut Avenue until the summer of 1951, and who had lost everything in a flood that the county had never entirely learned from. She told them about her father driving 3 times to Cedarwell. Standing on the sidewalk. Never going up to the door. She kept it brief. She did not linger. Because the room already understood. Then she told them what she was proposing. $12,000 a year. From the county. In exchange for full research access to the archive. The number, she explained, covered her operating costs. She would hire 2 research assistants. Both from the county. Marcus Ojo. And, if she was willing, Delphine Rasker, because Delphine knew the county filing conventions cold, and because Corinne believed that a person who came forward when it was hardest to come forward was exactly the kind of person you wanted holding a county's records. Delphine put her hands over her face. All digitization would be done in partnership with the county clerk's office. The digital archive would be jointly held. Backup protocols would be triple redundant at multiple locations. During the current crisis, for as long as the drought lasted, and probably longer, any resident of Cedarwell County who came to her office with a legitimate records need would receive their first 2 document retrievals free. Because she was not trying to make a fortune from the worst season the county had had in a generation. She was trying to hold the memory of the place steady. Until the place needed it. She looked at the commissioner. I understand this proposal is not as sophisticated as Mr. Keech's. It does not involve a large upfront payment. It only involves me staying here, doing this work, for as long as you will let me. She sat down. Wade Purnell stood up. I move that we adopt Ms. Vasska's proposal. Delphine Rasker stood up. Her face was wet. Her voice was steady. I second the motion. The commissioner did not even call for discussion. All in favor. Every hand in the room went up. Every one. He signed the preliminary agreement on the folding table, with a pen Corinne handed him, her father's pen, and the sound of the pen against the paper was the only sound in the room. Outside, it was still 104 degrees. But something in the room had cooled. The rain came the following Thursday. 2.5 inches over 3 days. Not enough to end the drought. Enough to change its character. From catastrophe to hardship. Hardship, Corinne learned that fall, was something Cedarwell County knew how to manage. She hired Marcus at $22 an hour. As a partner, not an employee. He drew up his reorganization plan for the archive, over the course of 6 weeks. When he showed it to her, the sketches, the color-coded diagrams, the way he had grouped the boxes by neighborhood rather than by category, she understood, with a small sharp pain in her chest, that her father had built the collection, but Marcus was going to finish it. She hired Delphine Rasker part-time. 12 hours a week. Delphine filed for divorce in October. The insurance held. Her daughter was fine. Delphine sat in Corinne's office one afternoon in November, and said, without looking up, "I do not know how to thank you." Corinne said, "You already did. You came upstairs at 11 o'clock at night, with a folder." Delphine did not cry. But she did put her hand very briefly on Corinne's shoulder. And that was enough. Idelle Braithwood came every Wednesday. With a small tin of something baked. Sometimes she brought her sister. Sometimes she brought a great-nephew. Once, in early December, she brought a framed copy of the letter her father had written her mother in April of 1944. She hung it on the wall of Corinne's office, above the folding table, next to the index card. Corinne did not take the frame down. She looked at it every morning. Cormac Redland's inquiry went where inquiries go. Keech Archive Group was placed under a state and federal criminal investigation in September. In November, an assistant United States attorney in Wichita filed conspiracy charges. In February, Roland Keech was indicted on 11 counts, including arson conspiracy, wire fraud, and unauthorized computer access. He posted bond. He hired 3 lawyers. Corinne did not follow it closely. She had work to do. Ingrid came to the office one afternoon in late October. The trees on Main Street were yellow. The air had cooled. Corinne and Marcus and Delphine were working at 3 separate desks now. Corinne had moved into the larger office next door, and Wade Purnell had knocked $25 off her rent because, he had said, gruffly, one morning at Marge's, she was good for the building. Ingrid brought cookies. Ingrid always brought cookies. She sat in the client chair. She looked at Marcus, hunched over a laptop. She looked at Delphine, sorting a stack of scans. She looked at the rows of boxes visible through the open door of the archive room. Now labeled. Cross-referenced. Backed up in 5 separate locations. She held the silence for a long moment. In the old country. We had a word for this kind of work. Corinne looked up. The closest English is stewardship. A steward. Not an owner. A caretaker. Somebody who holds a thing steady, on behalf of something larger than themselves. Your father lived that word for 31 years. He did not know its name. He only lived it. Corinne swallowed. Ingrid stood up. She smoothed her skirt. Now you know its name. Now it is yours. She walked out. Corinne sat there for a long time. She looked at the photograph of Ada. Framed now. On the corner of her desk. Beside the small photograph of her father on the dock in Missouri. 2 people she had loved, in different ways, from different distances, and who were now together on her desk. She smiled. Just a little. She got back to work. The county budget for the following year came out in December. Corinne read it in her office at 7 in the morning. Snow was falling on Main Street. A light dusting. Just enough to make the town look like a photograph. On page 11 of the budget, under the section titled Essential Services, between Public Health and Road Maintenance, was a line item. Records Access Contract, Vasca Records Research, $12,000 annually. She read it 3 times. She thought about her father. Quiet. Careful. Alone. Sitting at his kitchen table in Missouri, writing checks to Mrs. Adeyemi, month after month, year after year, for a promise he had made to a woman he had never met, on behalf of a mother-in-law, who had already died, in a county he had never lived in. Essential services. Between public health and road maintenance. Exactly where he would have wanted it. She closed the budget document. She stood up. She walked over to the small window that looked out over Main Street. She watched the snow fall. She watched Wade Purnell scrape the sidewalk in front of his hardware store. She watched Delphine Rasker walk past, with a cup of coffee, waving to someone across the street. She watched Marcus Ojo turn the corner, from Elm, on his way in, with his laptop bag over his shoulder. She said, out loud, to nobody, "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Grandma. I'm still here." Then she picked up her father's briefcase. She locked her office. She walked down the stairs. She stepped out into the cold, clean morning. The snow fell. The town breathed. The land held its account. And Corinne Vasska, 32 years old. Once alone. Now not alone. Once broken. Now not broken. Walked across Main Street toward Marge's diner, where a cup of coffee was waiting for her, and where 3 empty seats at the counter would fill, with the people who now, quietly, without ceremony, considered her one of their own. Above her folding table. In her office. On a small white index card in her father's handwriting. The land keeps the account. Come close. Be still. Fade to black.